Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX14 Walsh and welcome to some more Gran Turismo Sport, a racing game developed by Polyphony Digital and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment for the PlayStation 4. Focusing on the game's online mode, known as Sport Mode, in this episode I take a look at my performance in the first race of the first stage of the 2019 Manufacturer Series season, which was a Group 4 race held at the Autodrome de Interlagos circuit. Please note, whilst I said in my previous video that I would continue to represent BMW in the 2019 Manufacturer Series, I changed my mind a couple of days before this initial race and decided to represent Honda instead. If you're interested in my reasons for this decision, please see my pinned comment in the comments section of this video. With that, let's get racing. Taking a look at the grid then, you'll see that I've qualified 6th out of 20 drivers, all of us being B driver rating drivers. My story for qualifying, I was happy with my performance, matching my best practice time at 140.8, just under a second off of first place at 139.8, but I had the feeling with 1st to 5th, those were drivers who knew the track just a little bit better than myself, to the point that in every sector they were getting at least 1 to 2 tenths of a second over the best lap time that I could put together. So I was pleased as a result, and there was a little bit of a gap between myself and 7th place, a tenth of a second, and then the gap started to expand considerably as you went further down the field. So I thought as though qualifying 6th was the best I could get out of the car based on having the opportunity to run it for 3 days, i.e. Thursday through to the Saturday race day. Now, as for my strategy in the race, it was a 9-lap race where tyre wear and fuel consumption were quite low, meaning that this was a sprint race, so you could run from start to end to maximum power, not have to worry about pitting for new tyres or additional fuel. You could just run the car as hard as possible, and my goal was not to try and pick up places in this race. If I could, I'd go for it, but otherwise try and finish within the top 10 and get a good starting result with the Honda NSX, for the simple reason it's the first time I've run the car in race condition. Now of course over the practice sessions I've run it around the track with tyre wear and fuel consumption on, but it's a very different story when you're running the car up against 19 other drivers. You have to consider things such as how the car handles when it's under a lot of pressure, or you're pushing the car really hard against a guy coming up behind you. Alternatively, when you're running in the dirty air of a car in front, that's going to affect the aerodynamic balance of the car and the overall stability of the car going through corners. And that was something I hadn't had the chance to practice because I don't do daily races, I only do the Manufacturer Series races to get that purest experience from my perspective of running in a championship. But with that we come to the ends of the field. We're about to get underway with a rolling start. A lot of Toyota GT86s on the grid. Seems to be a very popular car at the moment for some reason. And what we'll see is the guy in front in 5th place in the Audi TT is driving a car with a very high top speed, and that means I'm going to have a bit of difficulty in keeping up with that Audi, as we will see when we come off the main straight and then we go into the second straight on the first lap. And that's something I had to also get used to with the NSX. I had a rough idea of how the BMW M4 matched up against its opponents over the course of the pre-season, but now I'd have to learn it all again with the NSX over the course of this season. So we're underway, we're going to cross the start finish line to begin lap number 1, tucking in behind the slipstream of the Audi in front. And as we go into turn 1, I'm just going to take a little peek on the inside, just to let the Audi TT know I'm there, as they get backed up by the Porsche a little bit under the braking zone. As we come into turn 2 here, I missed the apex, meaning that I'm run off the racing line, and I fall back a little bit as we go around turn 3 here, Curva de Sol. And we now start heading down another straight here, going up towards turns 4 and 5. And as you can see, as we come up to turn 4 here, that whole factor of running in the dirty air of a car in front is going to come back to haunt me as I brake just after the 100 board, my standard braking point, but the car's just a little bit wobbly at the back, and that's because of the aerodynamic misbalance. Well, the fact now I've got the dirty air of the car in front, and that means the car just went a little bit sideways on me as we went through turn 4, coming through turn 5. And as we go up the hill here through turns 6 and 7, you're going to see that again. As I back out of it to the extent I actually end up almost cutting turn 7, around a little bit on the grass, that gets me a little bit sideways as we now come into turn 8. And I'm starting to have to try and set myself the goal of getting a bit of stability in my driving again as we come through turn 9 here and almost go sideways a little bit there. And now I need to settle down and just get into a rhythm. Done a lot of practice laps in the car, got used to how the car runs when it's by itself. And I was thinking as we're going around this, if I'm really struggling to run in the dirty air of the guy in front, then I'm going to have to back off and just simply settle for running in 6th and make sure I can manage the race against the guys behind. So I'm keeping an eye at the moment as we come to the end of lap number 1 on the timings on the left hand side of the screen. Because what I'm thinking is if I need to fall off the guys in front to over a second so I'm not picking up the dirty air from their slipstream, and I can manage the gap between myself and 7th place to just over a second, then I've got a very comfortable race on my hands because I can just run the car consistently, pick up the lap times, and not have to worry about losing any control of the car thanks to the effects of the guys in front, but at the same time don't have to worry about pushing the car too hard because I've got no pressure from behind. So you can see after the first lap, I've already fallen back to 1.7 seconds from 5th place, and I've got a gap of just over a second from the guys behind who are strongly fighting one another. And I thought, right, now's the time, just settle down, put in the race distance, put the laps together. We've done a lot of practice on this. Let's get a good set of 141s together, and those lap times should keep us in a nice position here, as it seems as though the guys behind are fighting enough, alternatively just not on the same pace as myself, as I set a purple sector for sector 1. Now we now come through turns 4, then follow through into turn 5 here. So as a result, you may be thinking at the moment, well, is this going to be a bit of a quiet race for me? Well, definitely. But this one is one I'm learning a lot from, because I'm learning as I go around how the NSX is going to handle under different circumstances. And also, if I start to push the car hard, as I plan to, as we come towards the end of the race, because there's a lot of fighting going up in front. It may not look as though there's much fighting going on between 1st and 5th at the moment. But what you can see is all the cars are running close together, and that means there's an opportunity, particularly on the long straights coming out of turn 3, and alternatively, once you come out of turn 12, you've got that curve straight all the way down to the start finish line. These cars could all be fighting one another, and I don't want to fall back too far to lose the potential opportunity to pick up 1 or 2 places at the end if I get a little bit racy and catch the slipstream of a guy who's just had to back out of the racing line of a corner because of the fighting they've been doing with someone in front of them. And looking in my rear view mirror, we can see that we've got 3 cars fighting over 7th place right now, so they're holding one another up as the gap between myself and 7th widens to 2 seconds, whereas the guys in front, it's holding in the region of 1.5 seconds, dropping a little bit here at the moment because the Porsche has been overtaken by the Audi TT, so now we're racing against a car that's got a lower top speed in the straight line, or effective top speed, compared to the Audi, and what we can see is we're making little bits of ground here just outside the slipstream range of the Porsche in front as we go on to lap number 3. And as we come through turns 1 and 2 then, you'll see I cut the first center S's a little bit, and that causes me to go a little bit sideways because I've got a wheel on the grass on the left hand side in turn 1, and that's something I needed to work on as well, just settling myself down, not trying to cut too many corners, just take the natural lines that I'd set up for myself throughout the practice sessions, don't want to push too hard at this point. As we're coming down into turn number 4 here, we can see that we're managing to stay closer to the Porsche in front, a little bit more easily than the Audi on the straights, and that's that straight line difference. But as well, now that I've settled into the racing rhythm of the car, let's talk a little bit about how the NSX compares to my experience with the BMW M4. Now what I found with the NSX is it's a very different car in terms of weight distribution or mass distribution, in that this is a mid-engined rear-wheel drive car, whereas the BMW M4 was front-engine rear-wheel drive. So what that means is a good chunk of the mass balance is shifted towards the rear of the car, and as a result the dynamic of how the car drives when you go into and out of corners is quite different. I found the back end of this car was susceptible to a key amount of oversteer. Compared to the BMW M4, you really had to push the car before you got a lot of oversteer, and if anything, sometimes on some of the corners, if you pushed it too hard, it felt as though you were picking up a bit of understeer going into the corners. So as a result, what I did to counter this, I spent a lot of time on Thursday just literally doing lap after lap around this track, doing 5 laps at each brake balance setting to see which was the best brake balance I felt to get the most out of the car and overcome the oversteer problem, particularly under braking. I found the back end would just wobble so much and become very difficult to get under control and cost me time. And in the end I settled for a -4 setting, I believe that's the setting number, where I've shifted a huge chunk of the brake balance towards the front of the car. As we now switch to the replay view for lap 4, just to give you an idea of another thing that I found was very positive about the NSX compared to the M4, is that when you got this car into a rhythm, it felt so smooth to drive. It didn't feel as though you had to attack each corner to get the most out of the car and the fastest lap time. Instead it was about driving the car smoothly, making sure the back end didn't wiggle too much, and just enjoying the performance of the car. And you'll see that as we're coming down to turns 4 and 5 now, and we're going to light this corner up very nicely, braking at the 100 board, tucking it into turn 4, getting on the curve, and then getting on the power as we come through turn 5, building up speed as we head up the hill towards towards turn 6. And we can see the Scirocco, or the Volkswagen behind us, in 7th place isn't really gaining too much on us. We've got a nice distance from them. We're matching one another's lap times. I'm not under any pressure at the moment as I missed the curb there at turn 6, but tuck it in nicely, breaking down to 3rd for turn 7. Now we come down to 2nd gear for turn 8, flying through into the left-hander here at turn 9. A lovely section 2 of this track. I must admit, constantly flying, and this is where I felt I was really gaining time on the guys in front and the guys behind. I felt the NSX was very good in the technical sections, whereas the BMW M4 for me was more of a car which seemed to do well at a good number of things, but didn't really excel in any regard. Whereas with the NSX so far, I found that within the gear range of 1st gear to 4th gear, the gears were quite extendable compared to the BMW, where 3rd gear in particular was quite a short gear from what I recall, and that meant that when you went through all these flowing technical sections such as section 2 on Interlagos, it meant that you could just enjoy each gear, extend each gear out, build up the power, then shift up into the next gear, and just really gain a lot of time on those cars which did not handle as well in the technical sections. As we come to the end of lap number 4, and you'll see that I set another personal best at the end of this lap, a 1:40.9, my fastest lap so far in race distance. Indeed, out of my practice sessions, I never really got into the 140s, but I've just managed to do it here. So you can see I'm really getting into that rhythm with the car. And the gap between myself and 5th is now 2.3 seconds. I have fallen back a little bit, and I would say that's because the guys in front are pulling one another along on the straights. You can see that 4th and 5th place are very close to one another on the straights, and that slipstream effect, which I do not have to benefit me, means they can just gradually creep away what the good number of straights on the circuit. But there's over 3 seconds between myself and 7th, so that Volkswagen's fallen back now. So really it's a case of just making sure I don't do anything stupid at this point. I don't bin the car and bin the race as a result. As we're coming charging through it again, up into turns 6 and 7 here in 4th gear, then dropping down to 3rd as we cut across turn 6 and into 7. So other things to consider with regards to the driving of the NSX, or what I felt with it, was that because it was a less aggressive car, I didn't feel this onus that I was always trying to push myself 110% every time I did a lap at the circuit. It was just a case of, because the mass was so far realigned to the rear of the car, whereas with the BMW it was towards the front, I mean, I didn't feel as though every corner I went into I'd be attacking the corner under braking, and instead it was just a case, I should say, of just flowing the car through each corner, making sure you take a nice natural line, you don't make the car do anything it doesn't feel like it wants to do. Like here, as we went into turn 12, I decided to see how late I could brake, and as a result, I mean, I missed the apex of the curve, and I've actually dropped quite a bit of time off the guys in front. I wanted to experiment with that because there was nothing to lose at that point. Well, there'd been a good 4 seconds between myself and the guys behind, and 2.5 seconds between myself and the guys in front. I just thought, let's see how late we can brake into turn 12 and how far the limit of the car goes, because I may as well use this as an experimental race or a practice race. As you'll see in Formula 1, when some cars get moved to the back of the grid and they're a lap down, what they'll do over the course of the race distance, they'll still run the race, but they'll use it as a practice session to see how well the car handles. They'll start throwing on different tyre sets or changing the car settings. It's no longer a race competitive car, one could argue, but they do it so that way they can get more data and build up the experience for the future races. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm using this race to say to me, right, if I'm on a similar circuit to Interlagos again in the future, which there may be the case, seeing as a good number of these races are going to be sprint races, i.e. low fuel consumption, low tyre consumption, and it should simply start to end on a single set of tyres and a single load of fuel, what's the car going to be like in similar races to this one? Now what we can see up in front as we come round to the middle part of Sector 2 is that the guys in front are getting very dicey now, to the point that it looks as though a BMW M4 that was in 3rd place at one point has dropped back to 5th place. They've been overtaken. The Porsche in 4th place now has picked up a half-second penalty. There's a lot of fighting going on for 3rd place. The Audi TT has squeezed their way through into 3rd place, and I would expect if they're able to keep a decent racing line, whether that being a front-engine, front-wheel drive car, so it's going to suffer from some oversteering, a bit of wear on the front tyres, more so than perhaps my car. If they're able to pull away, then it's going to be a fight for 4th and 5th, and I'll be able to creep into that fight, because based on my experience of the BMW M4, I found that the Porsche and the BMW were very closely matched over a good number of circuits, and that means that these guys should be keeping one another within contention and holding one another up as a result, because they'll be driving slower to defend against one another or attack one another, and I can start to close that distance to them. And we can see that the gap between myself and the Portuguese BMW is 2.3 seconds at the moment, whereas behind to the Brit in 7th place it's 5.5 seconds, so I've got no concerns about the guy behind. I've just got to worry about the guys in front and making sure I make it to the end. And we can see on the lap times on the right hand side of your screen how consistent my lap times have been, i.e. 141s all the way through if you exclude the first lap, and even a 140.9 on lap 4. I'm gaining confidence in the rhythm of the car. I'm really settling down, and that's what's enabling me not to drift too far off the guys in front. As we can see, the Porsche in 4th took their penalty, which means the BMW has now moved up into 4th place, but in return they overdid it into turn 4, and it looks like the Porsche almost followed them, and that means they've both now going to pick up a half-second penalty, because that's what happens when you overextend turn 4 and run off the circuit. It was something that I found time and time again in practice, and I made sure not to do it over the course of race distance. This has brought me much closer to the guys in front, particularly the BMW, and I've got a strong feeling that if I can maintain a close distance to them going through sector 2, then I can use the slipstream from the two cars as we go through sector 3 in order to pull me just that little bit closer on lap 8 and perhaps go for a move for 5th place. Or alternatively, perhaps even go for 4th if they're close enough to both of them as they take their half-second penalties on the straight going up into turn 4, but we'll have to wait and see. So I'm starting to feel a little bit more racy at this point, and what you'll see is I start to actually push the car a little bit harder. Not to the point of overextending the braking zone into turn 12, mind you, as we did previously on lap number 5, but to the point you can see that BMW just got a little bit wiggly at the back end there, coming out of turn 12, going up into 13, and now we're coming around into turn 14 and onto the straight to complete the lap. Unfortunately here's the problem with the NSX. It's not as fast in a straight line, and because the BMW is just that tiny bit faster and they're benefiting from the slipstream of the Porsche in front, it means look how the gap is just holding steady at the moment. I'm not really gaining on the straight, and this makes it difficult for me because I need to get a perfect run through the centre S's here. So turn 1, turn 2, can we get a nice run through here? Looks as though we can. We get lined up very nicely up into 3rd gear. Now coming through turn 3, cover to Seoul onto the straight here. I'm in the slipstream of the BMW in front. They're getting ready to take their penalty. They're half a second up the road, so this should bring us side by side as we go up into turn 4 here. We just got to make the move stick. As we switch over to the replay camera, I get on the brakes, however, a bit late. I brake as late as possible, and what this causes to happen is I end up forcing the BMW to run off the track. Now if you roll that back slightly, we're not going to do it here, what you'll note, it's not too visible, is that the BMW actually bumped into the right hand side of my car, which led to them going so far off the track. And I didn't pick up a penalty at that point. It could be argued that I had the nose of my car in front, but I felt as though I'd caused the BMW to go off the track. I hadn't given the room because I'd run so wide. So here you see as we go through turn 8, I brake really early, give the BMW the space to take the place back, and we're racing once again. I may not have needed to do that, but I thought I'd do it as a courtesy simply because I felt responsible for costing the BMW to completely miss turn 4 in him, because I just overextended the corner by braking so late. Something I need to get used to again with the NSX, that sometimes you really do need to be careful of those braking zones. I missed my braking zone there, and that's cost me the ability to get 5th place by the looks of things, as the BMW is now pulling away a little bit, but perhaps we'll be able to fight them once again on the final lap. And we can see they're not too steady in the car in front, they're pushing it very hard, whereas I'm keeping it nice and steady by the looks of things in my own car, and that means that whilst we're falling back here, and here's the prominent difference in straight line speed, we can see that the BMW is initially pulling away. I'm starting to balance it out with the slipstream factor, albeit I'm nowhere near close enough to make a move going into the centre S's, i.e. turn 1, as we start the final lap. And this is something which is a concern of mine now, is that when we're on tracks with a lot of straights, the NSX is going to struggle a little bit compared to a good number of its competitors. You see I get a nice smooth line going through the centre S's, go a little bit deep as we come into turn 3 there, not too much, doesn't cost me too much time. I'm still within half a second to the rear end of the M4 in front, but I'm just not close enough to benefit from the slipstream here. It's a real struggle to get close enough to be able to try the move again into turn 4, and ideally I'd like them to have another penalty to give it a shot, but unfortunately that's the way it is. They get a bit sideways in turn 4. I just about keep it on the track because I'm pushing it hard now going through turn 4 into turn 5 here. We can see we're falling back because us going a little bit over the edge of the track there cost us the time or the speed coming out of turn 4 as we went into 5, and the BMW is just able to keep the gap almost up to a second now. There's 7 seconds between myself, 7 seconds, yep, 7 seconds between myself and 7th, so haven't got to worry about any pressure from behind as we now come through at turn number 9 here. We're getting it nicely lined up, just extended a little bit away from the apex, but it doesn't cost too much time if we get on the power earlier. And we can see that the BMW is now getting closer and closer to the Audi TT in 4th place, and what this means is this spells the end of my aspirations for 5th place, because unless one of those guys makes a mistake up front, a significant mistake, when we come onto the final straight to complete the race, the BMW is going to get the slipstream of the Audi in front. They've already pulled the gap out to a second, pushing the car very hard, and it means I've just got no opportunity to catch them anymore. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to settle for 6th place, but to be fair, I've achieved my goal of finishing within the top 10. It's been a consistent race if we look at the lap times, bar lap 8 where we overextended turn 4, and can't complain. We're going to bring the NSX home in a valid 6th place. Having had time to reflect, I think this race was a positive start to my relationship with Honda. Whilst it was not the best race for the car in terms of picking up places, in the end us finishing the same place that we qualified, at the same time there's a lot to learn from and I'm already starting to get a feel for what the NSX is going to be strong and weak at. For example, Sector 2 of the track, a more technical one with a good number of corners and hairpins, was quite a strong sector for the car. Whereas the more power or straight dominated sectors of 1 and 3 was where the car struggled to keep up with the opposition in front, and ironically I would be chasing down a BMW M4 in 5th place, i.e. the car that I've just scrapped. But nonetheless, we'll have to move on now to the second race at the Kyoto Driving Park Yamagiwa circuit this coming Wednesday. Thank you for watching. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like, comment or subscribe for future episodes. As always, I have been TX141, and until next time, take care.